Decades of hostility between Iran and the US seemed to have no end in sight when in July 2015, Tehran agreed to limit its nuclear program in return for the lifting of international sanctions. Until
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Trump reimposed all the economic sanctions that had been removed and that had caused such economic hardship for Iran's 80 million inhabitants. These measures had included secondary sanctions applied to companies and individuals throughout the world that conducted financial or commercial transactions with Iran. But the Trump administration not only reimposed the sanctions, but stiffened them further, making them one of the most draconian sanctions regime ever imposed by Washington on any country. The new sanctions, for instance, took in various Iranian financial institutions that had previously facilitated the importation of food, medicine, and medical equipment. So far, the US Treasury has blacklisted nearly 1,000 Iranian entities and individuals, targeting virtually all sectors of Iran's economy. Trump's maximum pressure approach consists in destroying Iran's economy. I mean, at times they actually admit that the pain US sanctions are causing for ordinary Iranians is part of a strategy to compel Iranian citizens to demand their government to change its behavior, which we know is a euphemism for regime change.
Things are much worse for the Iranian people, and we're convinced that will lead the Iranian people to rise up and change the behavior of the regime.
So that's what you're hoping, that these sanctions are going to help push the Iranian people to rise up against the regime and overthrow it?
The US government imposes crippling sanctions to suffocate ordinary Iranians.
Iran is in big trouble right now. Their economy is crashing. It's coming to a crash. It's very easy for us to make it a lot worse.
And then, when people are out in the streets because they're suffering as a result of the hardships that the sanctions are causing, then suddenly the US is standing with the people of Iran? Trump even wrote a tweet in Farsi showing his solidarity with the Iranian people. Come on, really?
It's an interesting statement when you say you stand by the people of Iran and you call them terrorists or ban them from entry to the United States.
Sanctions are killing thousands of Iranians. They're preventing Iranian companies and hospitals from purchasing essential medicines and medical equipment overseas. Cancer patients are among the first collateral victims. Iran produces most of its medicines, but still has to import the most advanced and often life-saving ones. Because of the sanctions, buying them overseas has become more expensive, if not impossible, to obtain.
I'm saying this to the leaders of Western states and Americans. You may have political conflict with our government, but your methods actually hurt people. In classic war, when it's guns and tanks, there are some rules. But with sanctions, we have no rules. I call it a silent battle. A war without sound of guns. The first victims in this war are the civilians. It's women, it's children.
Moreover, renewed US sanctions have directly impacted families' purchasing power, contributing to inflation rates of around 30% in the past year. The new sanctions now target the industrial sector, construction, textile, and mining. The executive order points to several companies and 8 senior officials of the Iranian government, as well as the largest steel manufacturers, aluminum and copper. It is obvious that these measures are only affecting civilians, as many of those in and out the Trump administration recognize.
But the more unstable we can help Iran to become, the better it is to actually secure peace if we can get rid of the theological regime one day, or if the Iranian people can get rid of it themselves.
So it's interesting how you say.
Of course, US officials usually claim that sanctions are targeted with drone precision to not hurt the Iranian population.
Myth number 1. The United States sanctions medical supplies going to the Iranian people.
Yes, in theory, medicines are exempt from US sanctions, but the financial transactions to buy them are not. In practice, US sanctions function as a tool of economic war against Iranian civilians, an economic weapon against unarmed civilians. It's collective punishment. The US government talks about sanctioning a regime as if it were this kind of monster rather than an entity with institutions and employees that provide public services to millions of people. When Washington talks about Iran, they make you think of this. But don't forget, Iran is a country composed of normal people like you and me. Families, workers, children with dreams and hope. And you can be certain of one thing. They do not want US intervention. They want and have the right to solve their own problems. They treasure national sovereignty, something that both Trump and the Democratic Party have been talking a lot about lately. But brutal sanctions, the US travel ban, constant threats of bombing, anti-Muslim bigotry, and a complete lack of sensitivity to Iranian sense of dignity are the nuts and bolts of US policy towards Iran under the Trump administration. The fallout from the assassination of General Soleimani is not over, and Trump may well escalate the confrontation with another reckless attack. That is why on Saturday, January 25th, in nearly 150 cities across the US and the globe, tens of thousands of us will be protesting against economic sanctions in Iran, the buildup of troops in the Middle East, and threats of war with Iran. Go to CODEPINK.org to find an event in your city. Don't see it? Organize it. We can help you. Come on, let's act together now.